Invited to come and talk about pharmacy benefits, maybe give a few cost-saving ideas as to how you can manage your benefit better to better suit your needs. This is me. So I work with GBS Benefits. We're the benefits consultant for the county, and I work on the pharmacy piece of things. Obviously, I'm a pharmacist by background. I've worked in big pharma, so Pfizer, a company called Aventis, some small pharma companies, as well as most recently, before I came to GBS, I was with Walgreens, Walgreens corporate out of Chicago. And for Walgreens, I worked with the big pharmacy benefit managers, so Medco, Express Scripts, and Caremark. So I worked with them, contracting what the pharmacies get paid by those entities and health plans. And so I've got a pretty good familiarity with how that system works, how the financial part of pharmacy works, and I'm hoping that I'll share at least a couple tidbits that are of interest and might be helpful to you guys and your families. So we'll talk about that, a little bit about just cost savings overall, generics, specialty drugs and assistance programs, pill splitting. Seems simple. It really is simple, as well as some information on formulations and combinations. And then I'll talk about a couple different tools or resources that you can use to help kind of comparison shop for your prescriptions. Believe it or not, you can save money by shopping around. It takes a little legwork, but the savings are real. Because at the end of the day, right, we don't want cost to be a side effect of people taking their medications, right? If medications, and they are costly, anything we can do to kind of mitigate that is helpful to you, and it's helpful to your plan, to your benefit overall from a cost perspective. So prescriptions are probably the most highly utilized and certainly highly valued benefit of the prescription of your healthcare dollar. Individuals probably pay a little bit more for the prescription piece than they pay for other aspects of their healthcare. 70% of all Americans fill at least one prescription a year, and over 50% are taking 2 or more medications ongoing. So, very widely used. Usually if someone makes a health plan change, it's the biggest complaint, right? The pharmacy piece, when the formulary changes and you got to change your medications, it can be disruptive. But what we are seeing is, everybody knows healthcare costs are rising, which is forcing patients, like us as patients, we get treated by the doctor, you get a prescription, but we're now being forced to be consumers at the same time. And how do we go out and then try and buy those medications or those treatments in as cost-effective a way as possible? And we're really seeing that. Consumer-driven health plans, high-deductible health plans, put a little bit more of the upfront costs on the members. And to the extent that you can, if you have an HSA, the extent you can save that money, it's yours, right? So you want to spend less, it's your own money. Prescriptions typically, out of total plan costs, medical costs plus pharmacy costs, prescriptions are usually about 20% on average, maybe a hair below, and that's expected to grow to about 30% by 2020. I think it'll be tough to get there a couple of years after, probably 2020, and that's really driven by higher cost medications. So as you think about medications, prescription drugs, the best way to save money is through the use of generics. Everybody's familiar with generics. Almost 9 out of 10, 8.5 out of 10 prescriptions are filled with generic medications. And there's a lot of good ones out there. Between 2008 and 2012, over $100 billion in branded drugs. So drugs that had brand sales of $100 billion lost their patent protection, had generics introduced. Over the next 5 years, the most recent 5 years, another $85 billion in brand sales have lost their patent protection. So it's nearly $200 billion of what were brand name medications are now available as generics. So there's a lot of really, really good generic products out there. So we want to use those whenever possible. Last year, Crestor, maybe it's a medication you've heard of. It's a cholesterol drug. That went generic. We've seen the price on that decrease quite a bit. The next big thing for generics are going to be medications we call biosimilars. They're generics of biologic drugs. They're a little harder to make, so Copaxone's a good example. That's a drug for multiple sclerosis. There's a alternative generic version to one of the doses of Copaxone. It's called Glatopa, but it's less costly, about half the cost. Neupogen's a blood product. It helps you stimulate your white cells to grow. There's another medication that's a copy of that. Those were both launched. Uptake has been slow, and so the price, the discount hasn't dropped too much, but we're seeing more. Those are the only two biologics approved now, but we had a drug called Gleevec, which is a cancer medication, generic for that. So we're starting to see more now. Believe it or not, with Donald Trump, it's actually a good thing from a consumer perspective. There's a lot of focus on drug costs. There's a lot of focus on how do we speed development of generic biologics or biosimilars, because those are the real cost drivers going forward. So when I talk about generics, I want to make sure people understand what those are, and I apologize if this is hard to read. So, what is it? What is a generic drug? And it's important. It's a chemically equivalent, lower cost version of a brand name drug. It consists of a cost, they can be up to 90% less than the brand version, cost-wise. But importantly, it has to have the same active ingredient, same dosage, same safety, same strength, directions for use, quality, performance, and intended uses have to be identical between the brand and the generic. And a question we get, these are kind of from the FDA, I got these. These are frequently asked questions of FDA as it relates to generics. And the question is, are they as strong or are they as good, generic drugs? And the answer is really, from the FDA, is yes. They have to have the same quality, strength, purity, stability as the brand name drug. And most importantly, they go through a process to evaluate the bioequivalence, which is, it's proving, or it's data that shows that the drug behaves in the body the same way at the generic, the same way the brand does. The same rate of uptake, the same time to onset, the same peak blood levels, same duration of effect as the brand. So for all intents and purposes, they're identical within a couple, 1 or 2% difference, very little difference. They have the same active ingredient, same fillers, same dye color, same dye lots. So they spend a lot of time making sure these generics are just as good or identical to the brands as possible. So, and then the question is, so why don't more people use them, like whenever possible? And I think there's lots of reasons. Sometimes it's awareness, whether the physician's aware that there's a generic, or the patient's aware there's a generic. And I think that's less likely. I think there's a lot of information out there that tells that. What they may not know is maybe there's a generic available for another drug that could be used instead. Sometimes it's member preference. People just prefer the brand name drug sometimes, or maybe for someone it doesn't quite work the same. I hear that once in a while, but the data doesn't support it as much. There's a few categories which maybe I'll talk about where that does make sense. There's certain things where there's a very narrow therapeutic window where a small change in bioequivalence can have a big change on the individual. Seizure medications are an area we don't like to make brand generic switches because a small change could disrupt someone. But for the most part, they do work the same. Sometimes there's limited availability. Where there's if a $1 billion drug, lots of sales, lots of volume, a new generic comes out, they can't produce enough to fill the market. And sometimes there's a little bit of time where that ramps up that production. But generally, if you go to a bigger pharmacy chain, like Walgreens, we had contracts with the wholesalers that we got filled first. Right? So if there's a new generic and you want that, generally the big pharmacies can get them. Sometimes the formulary may advantage a brand over a generic. United Healthcare does this, and a few others where there's a generic for Adderall XR, which is ADHD medication. United still uses the brand. It prefers the brand because the brand pays a big enough rebate that makes it cheaper than the generic overall. But if you're on a high deductible plan, you're not getting that rebate. So you may be forced into buying a formulary product that costs more than the generic might cost for you. So that's something to be aware of. We see that occasionally. I'm not aware of any off the top of my head with Cigna. But most often, people are taking the drug that their doctor prescribed. They just use whatever is written for them. Sometimes there's a conversation, sometimes there's not. The doctor writes, here's what you need, and they write it down, they hand it to you, and you walk out the door. There's not a lot of exchange of preferences. And that's fine. I mean, yeah.
So do you have the option at the pharmacy at that time to be able to ask?
So the question is if you can ask, yeah, and that's a conversation, have it first with your doctor. And I'll talk about that in a second, but ask about it. Is there a generic for this, or is there a lower cost option? Make sure, that your doctor knows that, financial considerations are part of your discussion. He or she may not know that you have a high deductible health plan, for instance, where you're paying all that up front. They think, hey, it's just a copay for you. What do you care? It's $25 no matter what it is. It may or may not be. So I always encourage people to make that part of the conversation for sure. Yeah.
Can you make sure you repeat the question?
Yeah.
They say it because we'll record
Got it. Yep. So the question on that was, whether you can ask at the pharmacy and about whether there's a generic option. And I would prefer, if it was me, I want to ask the question sooner so you don't get to the pharmacy with your prescription. It's not something they can make a change. They got to call your doctor back, get something else. So often, doctors, right? They're more thinking about safety and effectiveness. Affordability may not be top of mind for them, and even if it is, they may not know what the cost of a particular medication is. And I've got a good example of that I'll talk about in a minute. Most of the time, the doctors I know, they've gotten in a pattern. They write for the tried and true, what they know. They know it works. They also typically are drugs that they're marketed on. They're detailed on. They're having ongoing conversations with sales reps. They're informed on those medications. So they're kind of staying up with the literature, and a lot of that is on newer products. No one, that's important. No one's talking to your doctor typically about generics. There's no generic sales forces. Generic drug companies don't have sales forces that walk in and say, hey, you should use our generic over the 10 others, because they're all identical. So there's no incentive for them to do that. But who does spend a lot of money on sales forces are brand name drug makers. I worked in that space. I know it very well. And we know down drug companies, everyone who's writing for their prescriptions. They know on a category who the top 10 percentile of prescribers are and exactly what they're writing for. You can buy that data. And so that's who's targeted. We know who are the big ADHD writers. We know who are the big estrogen writers, or you name it. They know who they are, big statin writers. And so what happens is, those guys are targeted, and they're marketed to incessantly. And they promote brand name drugs. And sometimes it's not always in the best interest of the patient, but more of financial considerations. So there's a couple examples. Amrix. That's a newer, long-acting version of cyclobenzaprine, which is an old generic drug called Flexeril. That's about, Flexeril, generic Flexeril is about $10. Amrix is about $350. But it's once a day instead of twice a day. Paxiva, that's another one. That's a different salt version of an older antidepressant called Paxil. Paxil, paroxetine, very good drug. Works for 99.9% of the people. Paxiva is a different salt, $250 compared to $5. And it's promotion. You're in there telling a doc why it's better, they're going to try it. They're going to use it. There's another example, Dexalent, ulcer medication. There's a bunch of generic ulcer medications. This is pretty much the only remaining branded one, so it gets all the marketing attention. Vimovo and Duexis are expensive kind of pain products that are combinations. I'll talk more about those. And you see a lot of marketing for testosterone products, topicals. There's some generic versions now. There's been a long time generic injectable testosterone, very inexpensive. These can be $800 a month for some of these. So why do they do it? Because it works, right? Detailing works. That's why these companies pay billions of dollars for sales forces to go out and detail physicians, because promotion works. Both promotion to the physician as well as promotion to individual patients through direct consumer advertising, whether it's TV or internet ads or whatever. If you look up a drug, and the next time you open up your Chrome browser, there's drug ads, right, for that product all over the place. And so people don't know what they are, but if they like the idea or like the image, they're going to ask about it. And now more than ever, I think physicians want to make their customers happy. right? Use what they want them to use, right? It's all over the place. You can't watch a NCAA basketball game with your 10-year-old kids anymore because every other commercial is for an erectile dysfunction drug. Or, I don't know if you recognize this guy. It's a little twisted up intestine for stomach issues. Opdivo is a new cancer medication. Right? If you're not being treated with the latest and greatest cancer therapies, are you missing the boat? Right? They appeal to to individual members. So anyway, something to think about. Nearly every major drug class or chronic disease condition has high-quality generic options available. But despite that, we continue to see, brand drugs in top 20 lists for what are utilized. And a couple examples. Lyrica is a pain medication. It's a newer version of an older drug called gabapentin. Androgel against topical testosterone. There's a generic version of that now, and there's other generic testosterones. Dexalance, I want to mention, that's the ulcer medication. Lots of generic ulcer, Prilosec and Nexium. Protonics, those were all great drugs. Now they're all generic. The only brand one remaining is Dexalance, so it gets all the marketing attention and it's getting volume. Benicar, antihypertensive, that's probably the only remaining good antihypertensive that's branded, but there's a lot of good antihypertensives that are all generic and very inexpensive. This one's a couple $100 still versus $4 or $5 for every other one. And it's marketing. Synthroid, that's a good example of where maybe it's a thyroid medication. That's one where maybe the carrier prefers that brand over the generic because with the rebate it's less expensive. Lunesta is a sleep drug. Pristique is an antidepressant. A lot of good antidepressants that are generic. So anyway, try those other options first. So what can you do, right? As patients, consumers, first thing is, your doctor may not know what's preferred on your formulary, so make sure that, if you can, take it with you. When my kids were little and they were going to the pediatrician a lot, I had a pocket formulary we printed out. And my wife kept it in her purse and took it along, so we knew what was on formulary all the time. Ask what a drug costs. Ask if there's a generic for it, and if there's not a generic for that particular drug, ask if there's another drug that may have a generic that would work in that same disease state, same category. Oftentimes, those examples I gave, they all had good alternatives, right? So it's a conversation that starts early, have it with your doctor, and it can work to your benefit. Specialty drug assistance, this is important. Specialty medications are usually injectables, not always, they can be oral. They are typically for chronic conditions like MS or ulcerative colitis or rheumatoid arthritis. So they're often, the drugs of last resort, meaning you kind of went through the steps of, you started with one medication, you went to maybe the next one, and now you're moving on to these maybe higher cost injectables. And so, at the end of the day, no one wants to take Humira if they don't have to, right? It's not you're taking it because you saw an ad on TV or whatever. They're good medications. They're actually moving towards first line. But because they're expensive, maybe health plans are trying to put more of the cost burden on the members up front, on the patients. Move it to a fourth tier maybe where there's a higher copay. Or if you're on a high deductible plan, maybe you have to meet the whole deductible. There's no cap on that. And in fact, you do have to just for tax reasons anyway. Normally we say that manufacturer assistance programs, for a drug like Lipitor, which it helps you only pay $5 for Lipitor when there's a good generic version of Lipitor, then the plan gets balance billed for $300. Those are bad. Those raise plan costs. They end up taking benefits away from you over time. But on the specialty side, they're good because the drugs are expensive, and because they're expensive, we want people, to continue to take them. They have great benefit. We don't want cost, again, to be a compliance, a driver of noncompliance or non-adherence. And a lot of good, frequently used specialty medications have manufacturer assistance programs available. Copay assistance, right? That knocks them down to $5 or $10 a month, no matter what your benefit is. And at least, it can help stretch your copay or your deductible dollar. what happens, you get on a high-cost drug, and I know there's at least one or two of these within your member population, within your plan, and people have a high first month deductible they've got to meet. That, Humira is $5,000, so you got to pay $2,500 in. Your plan year starts on January 1. You got your $2,500 deductible right there. With assistance, you might be able to stretch that over a few months. It's a big cash flow advantage to you as an individual. You don't have to come up with that money day one. So anytime you have kind of one of these medications or similar medications, look into manufacturer assistance. Here's the one. Humira has a savings card. You can make your copay as little as $5 a month. So look into them. It's free money. So to the extent they're out there, do a little research, go online, and you'll find these. And I'm happy to help if anybody's on one of these medications and they're looking for information. I've got a bunch of stuff I could send them. So again, know your formulary options. Sometimes, one drug's preferred over another, and that could have an implication for you from a copay perspective. Have that conversation with the doctor. The doctor may be indifferent. They're happy to use Enbrel or Humira. It doesn't matter, but if your plan prefers one, you want to use the plan preferred one. Central fill pharmacies, I think your specialty has to go through Cigna as a plan setup, I think. And if so, that's good, because actually, they're better set up with manufacturer assistance programs or foundations assistance, or if there's other financial assistance. They know where to go to get that help. You just need to ask. Because again, we want people to take these medications as prescribed with no gaps in therapy. Pill splitting is another approach. It seems pretty simple to me, right? It seems obvious, right? You can basically cut your drug costs in half by splitting a tablet. If you are on 20 milligrams of generic Crestor, and so you could get a 40 milligram Crestor tablet, cut it in half, and take the halves to get your 20. They had flat pricing. The Crestor, the 5, the 10, the 20, and the 40 were all the same price. So if you could get it 40 and cut it in half to make two 20s, your drugs go twice as far, your costs are half as much. These make sense. Some insurers have half-tablet types of programs. So call and ask if that's something that you think you might be interested in. Even FDA has come out with best practices in tablet splitting. It's got to be in the information they give you if they're splittable, how they're supplied. Usually if they're splittable, there's a score, there's a line on it. You can easily press and break it evenly in half, or you can get a tablet splitter. So it's pretty easy. Some things you can't split, right? It's got an enteric coating, which is like a coating to make it maybe extended release or sustained release. Anything that's an ER, XR, SR, you typically can't split because they're long-acting. It's the coating that makes it break down slowly. If you open that up, it doesn't work. Chemotherapy drugs, oral contraceptives, blood thinners, seizure medications, or combination drugs typically cannot be split, right? Because in the OCs, blood thinners, seizure drugs, those are the ones I kind of mentioned. If there's a really narrow therapeutic index and you go a little higher or a little lower, it could have significant outcomes, disadvantages. But things that can be split. These are a lot of really common medications. So Abilify, widely utilized kind of depression drug. Generics, and it applies to all the generics too. Benicar for hypertension, Synthroid we talked about, Crestor, Lipitor, Diovan is a common antihypertensive. All these can be split, right? So you could cut your costs in half. Abilify, just recently, the generic was over $500, $700 a month. Well, that's splittable. So if you're paying for that, I would go for the splitting for sure. Anyway, something to think about. Ask your doctor or your pharmacist if it's a potential for a medication, if you're on a chronic medications, especially like, the Abilify or, the cholesterol medications or antihypertensives. Your plan may have, call Cigna up and ask, or you can get your own tablet splitter. They're a couple bucks or, anyway, so something to think about there. Alternative therapies. So these are, there's some savings opportunities here. I like to think, if it's more convenient for you as a user, chances are you're paying for that convenience advantage. So if something is extended release or sustained release, meaning you can take it once a day instead of maybe twice a day, there's a cost associated with that. You decide as a consumer if it's worth it for you. Or sometimes, a different formulation maybe makes it, have a more rapid onset. And here's just a couple quick examples. So anybody heard of Ambien? It's a sleep medication. It's been around for a long time. The generic's really cheap. It's about $10 for a month's supply of Ambien. Well, if you get the extended release Ambien, so that maybe helps you stay asleep a little longer, well, that's about $50 for a 30-day supply. So if you're not waking up early, you don't need the extended release, or maybe you do need it. Zolpidem Mist is an oral spray of Ambien, generic Ambien, the same active ingredient, Zolpidem. That's about $75 for 30 days, and maybe it has a couple-minute faster onset than the oral version. So you decide if that's worth the extra money to you as a consumer. There's another one, it's a sublingual tablet, rapid dissolving sublingual tablet. Instead of a spray you put on your tongue, it dissolves quickly, even probably similar onset speed to the spray. That's about $200 for the same drug. You just decide whether that's something that's worth it to you as a consumer to pay for that for the same effect at the end of the day. This is one where I was giving an example of where the provider may not know how much something costs. Metformin, very common. It's kind of the first-line drug for diabetes, prediabetes. You start having high blood sugars, your doctor's going to put you on metformin. For the extended release metformin, 500 milligrams. It's $4 for 60 tabs, twice a day. There are a couple different, one was called Glumetza, this other one was called Fortimet. They were longer acting, 1,000 milligram, so you take one a day, 1,000 milligram. They're both over $1,000 for the generic when the generic first came out. We started seeing this and coming through in claims, and we have a client in Salt Lake City, they had their own clinic, so their own employed physicians, and I called them up and I'm like, did you know, and they were using a bunch of it, I'm like, did you know that generic Fortimet's $1,000? And he about fell over. He had no idea that was the price. And he instantly went back to all the patients he started and switched them back to the 500 milligrams twice a day at $4 compared to the $1,000. There's no clinical advantage, no data to support, no better outcome, no better blood sugar control with the once a day versus the twice a day, assuming you took the twice a day. And again, I talked to you a little bit about the once a day generic, once a day Flexeril basically. Amrex, $900, generic Flexeril, $7. The one on the right, you got to take that twice a day. This is once a day, right? If you're paying the bill, maybe that's not a good choice. Maybe you take it twice a day. But also be aware, if your plan's pay, if you're on a copay, maybe worthwhile. But if you think about it, kind of as a good, corporate citizen, that's plan costs that that's a lot, and we're always trying to find ways to make healthcare more affordable, and if people engage with it. Saves the plan money too, which comes back to you. Combination products may be more convenient. Again, it's combo. You can take one thing versus two. They're often much more expensive than if you take the two products separately. In almost every case, the two products are both available as generics. Before a combo can be made, both products have to be studied independently. They got to make it on their own, and then later someone puts them together, brands it, and charges much more money. Couple examples. So, acne medications, right? If you got teenagers or young adults, that's a big issue. Acne drugs are really expensive. Epiduo or Ziana, a couple examples. They're combinations of two readily available topical products. They put it into a single gel or cream and charge $500 a month when the two pieces separately may be $50 or $60 a month. So think about it. Talk to your doctor. They may, and I've looked into this one. Ziana, you can, your dermatologist will say, use the clindamycin first, and then later put on the other one to go to bed, or whatever it may be. So you can separate them out. You're talking $60 versus $500. For a parent, I think that's a pretty easy sell. I got a bunch of examples here. A couple, this one, Caduet. It's a combination of an antihypertensive, amlodipine, and generic Lipitor, so hypercholesterol and hypertension. It's about $125 a month for the combo product. the two parts can be 20 bucks. Amlodipine, you buy generic amlodipine, generic Lipitor, you take them. So you got to take 2 tablets. Right, again, it's your choice, it's your money. Bigger ones, there's a drug called Vimovo, which is naproxen, which is an over-the-counter drug like ibuprofen, and generic Nexium. It's $2,000 for the combination product a month. You can buy the parts for about $35. Right, so your choice. This is again, it's about awareness. It's about doing a little bit of research. But for a lot of our groups, we exclude Vimovo. There's another one called Duexis, very similar. You can't really justify that. Sometimes there are drugs that have multiple uses with different brand names, and so sometimes maybe one could be used kind of versus the other. And good example of this one is Revatio. That's sildenafil, 20 milligrams. It's for pulmonary hypertension. There's several drugs in the same class for pulmonary hypertension. It's also made by the same manufacturer, and it's the exact same drug as Viagra. It's the same. They're both made by Pfizer in the same plant, in the same line. And once 20 milligrams, Viagra is dosed at 25, 50, or 100. The sildenafil of Revatio is generic, so it's about, so if someone's taking Viagra or Cialis or Levitra, those are about $30 a tablet versus the generic, sildenafil 20 milligram is about 80 cents a tablet. So you could get to 50 milligrams however you want using the generic if you want. I don't know. I don't know how applicable this is. I mostly just include this example so I can put a cartoon in because it's just stuff gets a little boring. But I have a friend who's a urologist, and I asked him for some cartoon, and this was the only one that was even close to PG-13 or appropriate for a corporate type of event. So anyway, think about what you can do to save, right? There's opportunities. Avoid the fancy formulations, even if they're more convenient, right? You're going to pay for the convenience. It's your choice. The combos, as I said, each of the parts, there's a combo drug. Each of the parts was likely available separately, except for maybe some inhalers. And do your due diligence. A little research can go a long way. So I'm going to move on to drug pricing. So we're guiding you to use generics when possible. And now when you get a generic drug, how can you go about finding it as cheaply as possible, right? That's the next step. Because, right, drug costs, it costs a lot, and it's coming out of your pocket. So a couple things I want to show you just briefly. So on the right here we have, this is the Cigna website. You can go online and look up drug costs on Cigna, mycigna.com. Has anybody done that? Does anybody use this? All right, so that's what it looks like. And then we at GBS Benefits, we have a tool on our website, gbsbenefits.com. If you go off to the right side, there's a little flag that says RX tool. You click on that, and it takes you to this page. So just a little bit of background to kind of set the stage on drug pricing. And one of the questions we've gotten was about discount cards, and how those work. And so discount cards, these are kind of alternatives to your insurance plan. Right? They're administered by pharmacy benefit managers, and they help consumers, people with insurance or maybe or without insurance, to potentially buy medications at less cost than certainly they could without insurance, and in some cases even less costly than your insurance plan card would get it for. Discount cards, though, to be aware, are often designed to make money for the PBM or whoever's issuing that discount card. So if it's some entity that sends you a discount card, they're going to make money off that, so your pricing may not be that good. And one of the challenges is that if you get a card, it's hard to shop around with it. You can't go, it's hard to go to every single pharmacy and see what they'll give you. And that's something that we encourage, because you got to make that price comparison. So the nice thing about the GBS tool is it brings together about 10 to 12 different discount card networks into one place. So you can compare by drug, by pharmacy very easily. And I'll give you some examples of how it works. So what it does is it cherry picks the best discount card for a given drug based on the pharmacies that are around you. And so At the end of the day, right, we want you to use the tools. Go out there and do a little bit of research on your medications. And then just, on the GBS Rx tool, we've partnered with an entity that produced this, and they, you won't see, the downside of it is you won't see independent pharmacies on there, because they're not, we can only include pharmacies that are part of a national accredited board of pharmacies. And a lot of times the independents don't do that, so it's the big chains that are part of this organization. And it actually relates back to a Google lawsuit related to drug advertising. And so Google's not allowed to display the non-accredited pharmacies in this search. So unfortunately, by the way, and just as another disclaimer, not all pharmacies like discount cards. Oftentimes, the discount card could come in under their cost. So just to be aware, you may get a little pharmacy pushback on discount cards. Anyway, so here's a couple examples, though, of opportunities. So this was with Cigna. This is from a product I looked at about, 9 months ago. And this is duloxetine, which is generic Cymbalta, 60 milligram once a day duloxetine. I looked it up on My Cigna. This was for Casper, Wyoming. And, the cost for home delivery, it was about $34. At Kmart, $37, and at Walgreens, $37. This was on the health plan. Looking up on our website on GBS, at Albertsons, Smith's, and Walmart, and Sam's, and Safeway, all in Casper, it was $23 to $24. So a little bit of savings. It's every month. That's using the discount. So you just click on there, get coupon. It would print out a coupon. You can text it or email it to yourself, and you just show it to the pharmacy. It gives you the codes to type in. They type it in, and that would be your price. This is actually your group. So there are some claims for duloxetine. Your average cost, as you look across here, and this is deductible. So these individuals are paying they have to meet their deductibles. So for a where's one? This one. So, not too long ago, and at the end of March, 30 milligram duloxetine, that's a 30 milligram. They're the same price, so 30 tablets, about $30. That person presumably on a high deductible plan, paid the whole $30, hadn't met their deductible. That same product, except here, this is here in Brigham City, up here, I guess. Smith's is $21. So again, it's $20 with this program. It's your choice. You decide if it's worth it, right, to print the coupon and maybe use that and submit your receipt to Cigna. You could do that for a few months and then send in a bunch of receipts, and they'll can credit you that towards your deductible. But again, it's part of shopping around or going to see where pharmacy pricing is lower. Here's another example, allopurinol. This is a gout medication. You can see that, so for the 300 milligram for 90 tablets, it was allowed at $56. Or for that seems a little high. Let's look at, so here's 100 milligram for 30 tablets. 100 milligram, 30 tablets. At Walmart, it's $4. Right? This is on the insurance plan. But for the 100 milligram, 30 tablets at Smith's, it's 10, and for 100 milligram, 90, it's 27. So you can see the price can vary. 300 milligram, 90 tablets are $47 at Tremonton Community. If you look it up, allopurinol at Walmart, $4. And when it says no coupon necessary, that means that's their cash price, their usual and customary price. You can go there with your insurance card, and that would be the cost, $10. For the 90-day version, it's $10, no coupon necessary. So your choice, you can go to the pharmacy, any pharmacy you want with your insurance card, and one maybe costs the plan $30 or $40 or $50. If it's on the Walmart $4 list, it's $4 a month or $10 for 3 months. So again, market awareness, I guess. Shop around a little bit. Use the tools. Here's one more quick example. Might have one more after this. Celebrate. This is generic Celebrate. Celecoxib. 200 milligrams for a 30-day supply. It's costing right around $60, right? At Kent's Pharmacy. If you search that here through the GBS GoodRx tool, you can get it for about $28 at Shopko or Walgreens or Smith's. $60, so it's half price. Print the coupon, go into those pharmacies, you get it for half price. Again, if it's your money, and this person, right, they're paying for it. They're using their deductible. They have a high deductible plan, so they're paying for that. You could get it for half price through these sites. One more, diclofenac. It's a generic ibuprofen-like drug. What's it, Voltaren? 75 milligram, 30 tablets. They're about $24. Again, all right, these people are at Shopko, about $20 at Kent's. It's on the Walmart $4 generic list. So for 30 days supply at Walmart, it's $4. And people are paying $24. So, and that's all. That works on your insurance. So you use your insurance and go there. That's your price. So a few examples, right? Opportunities to save. I've got a whole bunch more if you're interested, but I think you get the gist of it. So again, know your benefits, know your plan options. Think generic first. It's a good way to save, and then once you're on the generic, you can shop around. Don't pay more than you have to. And to your point earlier, ask questions. Be involved in the medication selection, and make that part of the conversation is cost, because there are ways to lower your costs and get the same clinical outcome, the same quality of treatment. And there are things. So as we talk about smaller pharmacies that may not be on there, don't be afraid to ask. Right? If you have a coupon that's going to be good at a pharmacy down the street, ask the pharmacy you want to go to if they'll match it. And chances are they might. Right? There's a lot of leeway in generic pricing. That's why you see such a variation. And so they're buying for less than that. They may, if you're a good customer, they know you, they may give you a break. Because we don't want to become this guy, right? We spend all of our money on unnecessarily, look for free drugs. Anyway, that's it. Tried to rush through, get as much in as I could in 45 minutes. But if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or if you have specific drug questions you want to ask me afterwards, we can address those too. All right, thank you.